Hello students, it's time to talk about endgames again, and we're going to learn today how to win when we have our king and queen and our opponent has a king and a pawn that is about to promote. So imagine you are in a tournament game and you get to this position, there's a pawn raise, and by the way, you typically get to this endgame after a pawn raise. So let's say you get to this position, you push your pawn, you get your queen, and then everyone is around your table looking at your game expecting you to know how to do this, and then you struggle. That cannot happen, guys. After this lesson you're going to know how to do this just as good as you know how to do checkmate with your king and queen. And by the way, if you don't know how to do that by now, you need to stop this video and go to lesson number 18. You have to know how to do this checkmate, guys. This is a basic checkmate that you have to know it. And not only do you have to know it because, come on, we're on lesson number 64, but you have to know it because after you learn how to get this pawn in this lesson, you have to finish the game by doing the king and queen checkmate. So you better get that done. In that lesson, I explain how you could practice versus an engine. So do that over and over and over until you get the hang of it. So assuming that you get that under control, let's talk about how to win this, guys. It's very simple and you're going to see what I mean. So we have to go over how to win this, but we also have to go over a few exceptions. Not always you can win this, and you're going to learn when is it that you can't. And those exceptions are going to be very important, guys, especially because sometimes you're going to be the one with the pawn and you need to know those exceptions. That's going to be when you could make the game a draw. So we're gonna get to it. Let's first talk about how we make this work. First, we need our queen to get involved. We need the queen really close to the king and the pawn. And we're going to accomplish that by using the zigzag method. You're going to see it's extremely easy, but that's how we call it. So basically, we're going to use our queen to attack the king. So we put him in check. As long as we put the king in check, guys, this pawn cannot promote. This is the only concern we have. If the pawn promotes, we both have a queen, that game is most likely going to be a draw. So we start by putting the king in check, and now this king could do a few things. He could get in front of the pawn, and by the way, this is exactly what we want. If they do that by themselves, this is the opportunity for you to bring your king closer. In order for you to get this pawn, guys, again, you need both of your pieces working together. And the hard part is to get this king close. So we're going to use our queen to force our opponent's king in front of the pawn. When the pawn is blocked, he cannot promote, so that's the only opportunity we have to bring our own king. So of course, our opponent is not going to do that, but if they do, now you know it has to click. King gets in front of the pawn, we bring our king closer. Now, the other thing they could do is go here. Not many people are going to do that, or they're just going to stay away from the pawn because they know they're going to promote. Now, guys, this is when the zigzag starts. How do I get my queen from here to here? Well, I either attack the king in zigzag, so check, check, check until I get closer, or we do what I like to do. I like to attack the pawn. So my zigzag is going to be with the pawn and the king. Pawn, king. So I'm going to go attacking the pawn. That pawn is not defended, and even if the pawn promotes, I'm going to get it. Now, when the king comes over, I attack the king. You see? Zigzag, zigzag. Check. If they go, you know what happens if he gets in front? Our king is going to come over. If the king comes over here, guys, not only do I have these checks, but the king has to be careful. If my queen ever gets here, that's it. That king can never come around to help the pawn. So a lot of people are just going to do the best move, which is just staying here, and I continue to get closer to the pawn. They have to defend. I put him in check. You see, that queen came from a8 to f8, and look, it's really close now to the king and the pawn. Now, after the king moves again, I finally get close to that pawn. I'm about to capture it. Only move to defend the pawn is to come king f1. And at this point, I'm going to do this final move. Queen f3, which is a fork. If the king goes away, I get the pawn. Now that king is forced to get in front of the pawn. And this, guys, is the signal. That king now could come over. So this is how my queen gets close, and this is how my queen gets the king to be in front of the pawn. Now, once that king moves, guys, it's going to move out of the way. By the way, it doesn't make any sense to go here because it's going to be pinned. So that gives me an extra move to get closer. So what they're going to do is they're going to go king here, and now this is the only thing that could be tricky. This is the thing that if you forget it, you're not going to know how to make progress. Notice how this pawn is about to promote. All you have to do is pin it. So the pawn is pinned now, he's not going anywhere. And now the king could do only one thing, going to d1, helping that pawn to promote. If that king, guys, goes somewhere like here, that's it. My queen gets in front, that's the end of it. So when the king gets out of the pin, we have to just do the zigzag again. That's it. So how did we do the zigzag before? We did it from behind. So we go check. We know what happens if he gets in front. So he's going to go here. So zig-zag. I'm attacking the pawn, and this should be familiar for you now. He comes to defend the pawn, and look, check, attacking the pawn, and that king has to get in front of the pawn. So whenever this happens, my king gets closer. Only move that makes sense now, getting out of the way. This is the tricky part. Oh, I have to pin that pawn. That way he doesn't promote. He needs to come down, and I repeat the zigzag again. So check, I attack the pawn, and that's why, guys, before when I was on f8, I said that you could do the zigzag just attacking the king, but I really want you to learn it attacking the pawn and the king, because notice how it all comes down to attacking that pawn. He's by himself, the king comes over, now the fork, that king has to get in the way of the pawn. My king comes closer, he needs to come out, and now you don't even have to do the same thing. You could just use the help of your king to put that king in check. So you could do queen d3 check. Of course, he needs to get in the way. Going out of the way, guys, I know this is very basic, but I like to mention it. If he just goes away, we get the pawn, right? So he's forced again to go to e1, and finally the king comes closer. That's it. Anywhere the king goes now, I'm going to take the pawn, and we know how to finish this. Okay, so this is the method. This is how you actually capture the pawn. Now, I mentioned before that we have a few exceptions, actually a couple of them, and we have to know this. And those exceptions have to do with the rook pawns and the bishop's pawn. So let's say this king is actually over here. The pawn is about to promote, is a rook pawn, and our queen happens to be here. So let's just put this back here. So here we go. It's my turn. I'm the white pieces. And I'm going to try to do the same thing. I'm going to go check, and I'm attacking the pawn. So here, the black pieces have this resource. They could easily hide in front of the pawn, and they're not concerned about the king coming any closer, because this is going to be stalemate. If I just bring my king, it is going to be stalemate. So there's nothing I can do here. If they go now, check, I just get out of the way. I'm threatening to just promote. Check, I just keep going back and forth. If I go back here and I do something like check, it's the same thing. The king just stands by waiting to promote, and there's nothing that the white pieces could do. So keep this in mind from the side that has the queen, but also if you ever have the pawn, you know this is a resource that you have. If they just put you, again, if they just put you in check, you know you're going to be fine by just getting in front of the pawn, and there's no file for you to exit out on the other side. So this is the exception. This is how it works with the rook's pawn. Now, if we had a bishop's pawn and we have something like this, let's say the queen is actually on f3, it's going to be the same thing, guys. Actually, let me put this king here. So if I go here, check, this king only has to just go away from the pawn. We don't really care if they capture it, because then that's going to be a stalemate. So these are the two exceptions. You could just get in front of the pawn to get stalemate, or you could get to the corner and you get to this stalemate position. Now, with all of this said, guys, there is another exception within this exception. This is true. These exceptions that I mentioned, this only becomes true depending on the king. If the king is close enough, then these exceptions can actually be won. So let me tell you exactly what I mean. If I put this back, let's say I put the queen on c2, I'm going to put this king over here, and here we have the rook pawn again. If this king happens to be anywhere here, on any of these squares, so I'm going to put this here. So if the king happens to be in this area, then this game is going to be won by the white pieces, regardless of the rook's pawn. And this is how it works. And by the way, I just want you guys to keep this at the back of your head, because now if you ever get to this endgame and you see a rook's pawn, you're going to think, oh, there's a resource where they could get stalemated. But I know that if my king is close enough, I could do the following. You're going to bring your king over, and when they promote, then you have this move. You throw in checkmate in different ways, and there's nothing that they could do. So if the queen moves, the queen that cannot just put us in check. Let's say the queen just goes here. Well, you're going to do the checkmate. So that's something just to keep up the back of your head. Now, if instead we had a bishop's pawn, let's say we had this pawn and we had it over here. Well, if the white king happens to be somewhere in this area, let me go here, 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 here. Yeah, so all of this area is enough for us to win the game. And again, guys, this is just for you to keep it at the back of your head. So you're going to be like, okay, there's a bishop's pawn and there's a resource for them to get a draw. But if my king is close enough, I could do the following. So in this case, all you're going to do is you're going to bring your king to g3 in this case. And then when they promote, let's say they get their queen, you're going to do queen e3 check. The king has to move. And now look at this. Check, followed by checkmate. Or, of course, I give you the queen for free. Now, guys, go over this because I'm going to say it one more time. I'm sorry that I keep repeating the same thing. It's just for you to have it at the back of your head. These little things, these little resources, they're going to keep coming into your database, and when you need them, they're going to be available. So for the most part, you already know the zigzag method to get the pawn to the 7th rank, but whenever you know that that pawn is a rook's pawn or a bishop's pawn, you're going to remember these exceptions. It's going to be there for you to access it when you need that information. I don't want you to memorize all of that area that I highlighted because, come on, it's just not going to make sense. I just want you to have the ideas and know that you could calculate and see if it works or not. At this point in the course, you should have that power to calculate and see if it works or not. So again, guys, go over this video as many times as you need. Make sure that you know how to make this work. Put this initial position on the board and try to actually this position. So push the pawn, get your queen, and then the pawn on the 7th rank. So play it with someone, play it with, against yourself. Just make sure that you get this idea. Now, like always, leave me any comments, any questions that you might have, and I'll be more than happy to reply to you. With that said, I will see you guys next time.